medicine is changing very quickly now. Past 2 years made a big difference. In 2016, I was describing to everybody how in 2015, the major meetings had talks on this, but everybody avoided them. So everybody went sightseeing and so on. So you would go to the regenerative medicine sessions of the major meetings, and there'd be like 2 or 3 people there and so on. But that changed. So in 2017, the Canadian Society of Transplantation met jointly with the Cell Therapy Regenerative Medicine Society and was very, very successful. So it made it seem like suddenly regenerative medicine is mainstream and people have acknowledged that they need to pay attention to this. They can't go shopping, they can't go sightseeing, they need to actually look into this. And in the meeting that I'm responsible for, the Banff Transplant Pathology meeting in 2019 in Pittsburgh, the pre-meeting, the one-day industry-supported, kind of exciting beginning of the meeting will be devoted to regenerative medicine. So even if your inner core, your persona is telling you this doesn't interest me, that you are going to be forced to take an interest in it. There's no escape. It's becoming mainstream in science and medicine. It is a part of the interests of Singularity University, and last year at this time, there was a Canadian summit, Canada Summit of Singularity University. It was streamed here at the U of A, and this course took part in that. And it was kind of combined university and industry supported. So it was once again kind of interesting exercise in that, okay, at some very high level the university had bought into this. That didn't mean all the students had. So a lot of the sessions were really poorly attended. So I think that's what happens to some extent with the very cutting edge of science. A lot of people privately are thinking, do I need to learn about this? So kind of digging in their heels and saying, I never signed up to have to learn about this. But, eventually it becomes inevitable. Resistance is futile kind of thing. So in 2017, it seemed like the part of regenerative medicine called the Human Cell Atlas, which is individual cell transcriptomics, RNA transcripts of individual cells, that this was going to move forward mainly through social media contacts. It was kind of an amazing thing. You went to all the standard meetings, was nothing about it. A lot of the stuff about bulk transcriptomics, taking a chunk of tissue and analyzing the kind of average gene transcript seen in a chunk of tissue, but nothing about the revolutionary idea of doing it cell by cell. And if you think of it conceptually, the two are just entirely different. That if you take let's say a kidney biopsy, like that's my main area of interest. Kidney biopsies obtain other things beside kidney tissue. There can be muscle, there can be fat, there can be fibrous tissue. So the way bulk transcriptomics works is you just take a piece of tissue from a kidney biopsy. You don't even know that it's kidney, and look and see what genes are there. Whereas doing it single cell, you're able to so exquisitely characterize every single cell, and it's cheap. It's like 10 to 15 cents per cell. You can do like 1 million cells at a time and so on. So it seemed like there were forces at work, it's hard to say what all those forces were, to prevent this from being discussed in the major scientific and medical meetings. It was all over Facebook and LinkedIn and so on. And so people who were into social media knew about it. And also it was getting funding, not only from traditional funding sources, but also from the Chan Zuckerberg Fund. So in other words, it's a Facebook fund that supports science, and it was supporting this Human Cell Atlas project. But in all the major meetings that I went to, there was nothing about it. They were absolutely silent. If you would search on the phrase Human Cell Atlas, you wouldn't find anything. And so it was very, very dramatic. Okay, so that was 2017. What about 2018? 2018, it's finally reached the mainstream, kind of. It's in the major meetings. Like there's a plenary session in 2 weeks' time at the American Society of Nephrology meeting, the big kidney meeting, about the Human Cell Atlas. And the main proponent of that is Aviv Regev, and you can see her picture here. So let's just analyze this ad simply, okay? There are 4 pictures, there are 3 topics listed. So three of these 4 people who are giving plenary topic presentations, their topics are listed. But Aviv Regev's topic isn't listed. So she's listed and her picture is there, her name, her face, but not a single clue of what she's actually talking about. So this is once again at some level a kind of inhibitory force. I don't know why, except that there are a lot of existing companies that have invested heavily in competing older tech. And they probably don't want this phrase Human Cell Atlas to actually be revealed in the promotional material for the meeting. Okay, so what are the terms here? The terms you might be familiar with are regenerative medicine, tissue engineering, and cell therapy. To some extent, they are used for the same thing, but the trends are different. Regenerative medicine, its use has been pretty constant since 2005. Tissue engineering is going down, and cell therapy is going up. And so the other thing about this is that the provisions for reliable, consistent funding are not yet there. So everybody in this area is kind of flying by the seat of their pants. They're not quite sure how this is going to work in the big picture, and as opposed to other traditional areas of science where there's been funding for decades, kind of thing, and you can rely on it. But that will obviously change. I'm going to tell you 2 things right now. And they seem to conflict with each other, but you're adults now, and so you need to kind of deal with these situations that conflict with each other. Stem cell medicine, stem cell biology is the greatest hope for the future of medicine. It is like the way in which the problems we cannot solve at the moment will be solved in the long term. But it is also the area of the greatest intellectual dishonesty and fraud, and like people being cheated and people being harmed by making promises of being able to do things that just can't be done. So there are poorly regulated stem cell therapy clinics all over the world where people who may or may not be injecting stem cells are often doing patient care without any studies being done. So they're just assuming that this will work. And So not only may it not help, but it can cause, malignant tumors or big disfiguring calcifications to form and stuff like that. So it's a really complicated area. This would be an easier lecture for you to take in if you could just get one idea, like stem cell therapy is good, but you'll find that it's kind of a mixed bag, very much a mixed bag. Now, why do we need this? Well, if you think about your own beliefs about transplantation, I don't know whether those beliefs are strongly held or just in the back of your mind somewhere you have some feeling about it. But you probably believe it's kind of a miracle what it can do and that it helps people very much. But you probably don't realize it only reaches 10% of the patients who need that therapy. So a lot of patients die waiting, and that's obviously not a very satisfactory answer. I mean, it's okay as a kind of interim answer. The answer for now is we'll provide this benefit to 10% of the people. But in the long run, it'd be better to be able to provide replacement organs to everybody who needs them. And that's impossible based on allograft transplantation. In other words, unrelated organs that may reject from other people. First of all, you have to find donors, and then you have to treat rejection and all that kind of thing. Whereas you can imagine a situation in regenerative medicine where there is an unlimited supply of the organs and you can make them completely genetically compatible with the person, or compatible enough to readily work. So worldwide, 1.2 million people are in need of transplantation for end-stage organ failure, and current transplant protocols reach fewer than 10% of that number. So regenerative medicine can save the remaining 90%, over 1 million people annually. So regenerative medicine is already here. It works for simple organs, and it works for not very sexy parts of the body. Like if you think of, the skin surface and like bone and cartilage, those areas are not quite as exciting as individual organs, heart, lung, and stuff. But for those simple areas, it's been working for a long time. So depending upon and for simple tubular organs, it already works. Now I list trachea here, and I used to have a picture of trachea, and you can think, well, the trachea is a pretty important part of the body. But the history in that area is very, very dark. That the people working in that area hid a lot of patient deaths and adverse outcomes. And in fact, when it was looked into it, these patients, many of them had died very painful deaths. And so that's not completely simple when you talk about a tubular organ like the bladder. The trachea is more complicated than the bladder, but it's not anywhere near as complicated as liver, kidney, or something like that. So you might think we'd be close to the point where trachea could be successfully regenerated using stem cells and regenerative medicine. But in the Karolinska Institute, they had a huge project on this, and it almost wrecked the entire institute when it was found out that the actual patient outcomes had been so poor, and that papers have been published claiming much better outcomes than what actually happened. So regenerative medicine is already here, and it's in northern Canada. You know that we're the only major city in Canada off the US map. So in some people's minds, we're, not that much worth thinking about, that we're too far from the center of things.
We're in Russia.
Yes. But actually important things do happen here, and James Shapiro in surgery is involved in a very important juvenile diabetes treatment that involves regenerative medicine. And so we have, or I have, I want to look at it, the we part of the I versus we is mostly young people like you who are authors on the paper that I published in the last year of regenerative medicine pathology, tissue engineering pathology. That really hasn't been a thing previously. If you search that phrase, you won't find it anywhere. But as you think about it, as we begin to create organs from stem cells, we need them to be examined by pathologists to see if the right cells are in the right places. So that's what I have proposed and what we're starting to do. So as you learn about later in this lecture, I'm the creator of something called the Banff classification, which has to do with transplantation pathology. And this idea of tissue engineering pathology then is the next phase of that. So that's also something that's going on here in Edmonton. But maybe the most exciting thing has to do with the negative part of stem cell medicine, and that is the hype and the fraud and the intellectual dishonesty. And Timothy Caulfield, one of the best speakers in the university, he not only talks about celebrities, but he is a kind of celebrity himself, and he hangs out with celebrities. So he's a really cool guy, and he is doing really the best work in the world on these negative aspects of stem cell medicine. Stem cell tourism is people traveling to other countries to get stem cell therapies. Often, as I said, they're in these poorly regulated clinics where there really is no evidence not only that the therapy works, but no real proof of what the therapy is. They say that they're injecting stem cells, but there may not be any cells, and may just be saline, there are all sorts of things like that. Or they may be injecting cells that they don't understand very well, but the cells get where they're going, and they decide to create massive disfiguring calcifications or tumors or something like that.
So is it just that it's like so poorly regulated in other parts of the world that people fly out there to get these treatments?
It's not just other parts of the world. You would like to think that this is some primitive human behavior, and that first world countries that you're familiar with would never engage in stuff like this. But some of these poorly regulated stem cell clinics are in parts of the US, and some are actually in our own country, Canada. So particularly if you think about, well, what are we trying to regulate here? Suppose I take something from your body and give it back to you. Do you think that should be regulated at all? I mean, if I take something from you, work on it a while, and give it back, you may say, well, heck, why would that need to be regulated? I should be able to just do it, right? So that's kind of part of the reason why this happens. That then when you get something that's a little bit more general than that, say cells pooled from a number of different people, but who go to the clinic or something like that, right? So anyway, the regulatory agencies, they're spending more time on this now really than anything else. It's their big headache, because it's kind of like that old-fashioned animal in what's called the pull me, push you. So not only is this the area with the greatest promise for improvement of human health, it is also the area where fraudsters and crooks and so on are doing the most to take money from people for either no benefit at all or actual harm. And it's related to celebrity in the fact that many sports stars and well-known celebrities are also into stem cell tourism. They go somewhere and then they get a shot into an arm or leg or something where they were having a problem. They come back and say how wonderful it was. Then all their fans want the same thing. And if you think, well, I'm a rational human being, and of course I would never do it, but you are rational, but there's some other famous human being out there that you're sort of fascinated by, and even you would be influenced by this. Yes, Gary?
I mean, I think a great metaphor is the so-called snake oil salesman, from days past that would go from town to town saying he's got snake oil, it cures everything, it does this, it does that, and only if you don't love your family would you consider not buying some from me. But it's the same idea, and I would say the reason for regulation is we haven't been able to, stop other human beings from trying to take advantage of, especially the ill. When your loved one or you yourself are ill, you would do almost anything. And that's why I think regulators have to some degree, protect people from this. And that dynamic is going to be underlying a lot of the future of medicine. To what degree will it be legitimate scientists, and to what degree will the salesmen who see the possibility just for money making, how will you separate one from the other?
Yeah, it's a very complicated matter, and a lot of compromises have been entered into. So it's true that, for instance, the FDA in the US, it ordinarily takes a long time to approve a new therapy, but from pressure from families of ill people, they now have a number of fast-track paths, particularly in a setting where your own cells are going to be used for something. Like you bank cells, they grow up, some of these cells give them back to you to treat something wrong with you. And so it would be nice, then, if you think about fast tracking, okay, that increases the risk because you don't have the usual scrutiny of looking at things. And if you think of what it's like to work in Health Protection Canada or the FDA, you'd like to be able to sleep at night, right? You'd like to go home and feel confident, I've done a good job, I'm keeping the public safe, right? And there are more and more pressures to kind of take shortcuts and rush things and so on. And you can understand the need for those pressures. But anyway, so if you go to the Health Law Center website here at the U of A, you can see all their recent publications. These are just some of them. So, exploiting science, systematic analysis of alternative medicine clinic websites, marketing stem cell therapy, so on and so forth. So it is really amazing how important many of these publications coming out are, and they're fun to read too. From Kim Kardashian to Dr. Oz, the future relevance, popular culture on our health and health policies. Science, celebrities, and public engagement, science confronting stem cell hype, so on. I won't go through all of these, but I'm very proud of the quality of a lot of these publications. So in a sense, Edmonton and this university are doing a lot in the regenerative medicine area. And this will solve some problems you may not have been aware of, and they may not be big problems for you, but the problems that I'm aware of. So the areas of medicine I'm most closely associated with used to have the greatest luster, like kidney medicine and transplantation was really the most, those were the most revered areas, and the best and the brightest young people went into those areas, and like transplant surgeons used to talk about at parties that you could tell who they are from the way they carry themselves, you know, just a little bit more confident and better than other, you know, physicians and so on. And indeed, that was a thing, but it's changed a lot, and now much of the luster is gone. Young people going into medicine tend not to go into transplant and kidney medicine now. And there is the feeling, I think, that probably regenerative medicine will change that. That once we become able to provide organs for everybody, then these areas will become a lot more appealing. But it's complicated enough. You've seen this curve before, but if you think, what is going to ensure that you keep your job, right, as opposed to losing your job to a machine? To some extent, it's how complicated what you do is. And it's just complicated enough. Like, if you think about the difference between the liver and the kidney, the liver, very important organ, but to some extent, it runs in parallel. So if you mix up the cells in the liver, they would still do something useful. Whereas the kidney is all sort of in series. You know, you've got the glomerulus, which goes into the proximal tubule, Henle, all that kind of thing. And you just mix all those cells up, they don't do anything useful. And so this idea of getting the right cells in the right places is really much more challenging in the kidney. So it's kind of the moonshot, the ultimate success in regenerative medicine, but that will happen. Okay, so just to back up to 27 years ago, 1991, I created the Banff classification of kidney transplant pathology. Histologic criteria for the diagnosis of rejection and all other conditions that you would diagnose under the microscope in transplant biopsies. So this had begun in the heart. I did it in the kidney, and then we expanded this to all solid organs, and there was kind of a political failure in the heart group. So they started out with pathologist authors only, whereas we, from the very beginning, included all stakeholders. And so the politics didn't work very well in the group in the heart classification, because they ended up having no power. So they had this classification, but all the clinicians and surgeons said, well, we didn't have any input into this, and we don't accept what you say. So ultimately, the Banff classification had impact on all solid organs, and that's the way it is now. So it also includes things like composite tissue grafts, things like faces in the hands and things that have multiple different components, as well as small bowel, pancreas, lung, heart, kidney, liver, so on. So you may feel it's a bit weird to have me, the person who started this, telling you about it, because maybe you need a more objective opinion about it. So that I can provide. Ben Adam is a young person about your age who has just joined our faculty, And when he talks about the Banff classification, he says the use of the Banff classification and scoring system is the sign of an educated transplant pathologist. It gives the imprimatur that you know what you're doing. And imprimatur is a word you probably know from the early days of printing, where somebody would say, "Let it be printed." Imprimatur. So anyway, that's what he feels the classification that I created does. And these are sort of the milestones in it. And in 2018, we published the first paper on the Banff classification of tissue engineering pathology. The best journal in transplantation, American Journal of Transplantation. Its most cited papers are the ones from the Banff classification. Yes?
Why is it called Banff?
Okay, yeah, well that's important. If you think about starting something, how do you decide what to name it? I thought that if you're doing something truly global, where you want to be fair to everybody, you want a name of a place where there'll never be a big medical school, right? Because you don't want, like, you know, and a place that's sort of fun and where the muses can find you. I don't know if you believe in muses, but you can think of the classical, you know, inspiring muses. So when you go to Banff, it just seems like the muses are there, and it's not a big enough place that there'd ever be a big medical center there. If you've ever actually gone to the hospital there, you know it's very bare bones, and it's not really expandable beyond what it is. So I thought it was good to give the classification that name because it would make everybody feel included. Like, everybody can go to Banff, they can have fun, they have equal status there, and there's not like some huge medical center there. And so that's where the idea came from. So there's a kind of humility in that, right? We could have called it the Solez classification or the University of Alberta classification or something, right? And why is humility in leadership important? I can tell you in 1991, I did not know the answer to that question, and nothing I was doing then was strategic. I mean, it's not like I began this in the way that I did because, well, if I do this, this is all. No, it was what seemed natural to me. I'm sort of into social justice and stuff, and it seemed like you want something that is equitable for everyone. But it turned out very important to do it in that way. And there was something else about me, I think, that as a child I was fascinated by the rebel voice, by pirates, by people who were rebelling against the mainstream. And so when people would rebel against me, rather than getting mad, I'd be excited. Wow, you know, come in, join us, we'll give you a platform. You know, you can be part of the next iteration of this, and, you know, you've got good ideas, and so on. And as a consequence of that, so now 27 years later, there is no competition to this medical standard. And most medical standards have multiple competing standards, and they all have different people's names associated with them. Like in, you know, lymphoma, there's a Rappaport classification. That's usually what happens. People like to get their own names on things, and then other people want their names on things, and that's just the way the world works, and that's not what's happened here. So somehow my embracing the rebel voice, my enjoying it when somebody complained about what I was doing and seemed to want to change it. So, and it also involves being humble when you're in a room and you came into that room with a certain, you know, whatever it is, testosterone level of the day, and your own ideas, right? And so are you gonna be macho and make sure that your ideas carry the day? Or if somebody else has better ideas, and if the group seems to want to go with them, are you going to be willing to give up your own ideas and go with that other people's better ideas? And that also explains something here, which is that for these past 27 years, we've been doing something that every book about consensus generation tells you is like illegal and wrong. We had an expert, me, moderating consensus. And if you look up how to generate consensus, all the books tell you, oh no, you can't have one of you do it. You get an expert in generating consensus who knows nothing about what you're doing. You have them come in, you put post-it notes on the board and train you in a new way of thinking and so on, and at the end of the session, you'll have consensus, and that's the way it's supposed to be done. Well, that never made sense to us. So, but if you have somebody who knows the area running the show, that person has to be willing to step back, to let other people talk, to do stuff like that, or the whole thing will be wrecked, and the books will be right, that you will have engaged in 27 years of inefficient, unfair practices in terms of generating consensus. But that isn't what happened. We've sort of compromised over and over, and yet, you can look at the voices of other people coming in and leading the various beneficial changes. It's been a very healthy thing. How difficult has it been? I can't really answer that. The only thing I can tell you, and this is amazing, it'll sound like it's not true, but it is. The NIH used to run consensus conferences. And people figured out how to game them, how to use them in a self-interested way. In other words, you and your friends get together and figure out what you want the outcome of this NIH consensus meeting to be, and how you would have to act at the meeting to make that happen. Then you go to the meeting, you make that happen, and other people are kind of amazed. How come those ideas were so better, so orchestrated than the others, right? So the NIH gave up consensus meetings forever. They said, we can't do this. There's something wrong with with the way this is happening. And what I say now is, go to the Banff people. They seem to know how to do this. Now, if you look at the difference in scale between the NIH and us, not just one order of magnitude. I mean, it's huge. They are tremendous. They are gigantic, and we're this little tiny entity. We have meetings, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people every 2 years. But it is interesting how this has turned out. And I think no matter what you want to do, there's probably a lesson in here for you, right? There's a lesson about what leadership should be like, whether, being humble can ever be of benefit, or if it's just something that hurts and is never really good to do. We pretend that being humble is good, but actually no one in the right mind would ever do it. That doesn't turn out to be the case. I think the lesson here is that somehow being kind to other human beings sometimes turns out well, right? I mean, it sounds like, no, that wouldn't ever work. But it's kind of nice to know that does work sometimes, and this seems to be one instance. I mean, that's kind of how I see it. Okay, so tissue engineering pathology will be added soon, and we presume that this increased number of articles about the Banff classification will continue to go up. This sort of shows how the dynamics of the meeting works. And it isn't rigid. So I guess that's the other thing about it. you can imagine a kind of elitist organization where anything you try to do to interact with that organization, you're rebuffed because you don't know the secret code and stuff, and you don't know the right people, and so you can't get in, right? Whereas actually, practically every meeting, we're excited that there's somebody there that we've never met before, and they're speaking, and they've got good ideas. And that's part of the excitement of Banff. The unknown young person who shows up there for the first time and has significant input. So this is the organization's structure. I'm the chair, Michael Mangle, who's in real life here at the university, is my chair. He's chair of laboratory medicine pathology. So he's currently the secretary treasurer, and in 2019, next year, I'll step down as chair and he will become chair of the Banff Foundation. So these are some pictures from the meetings over the years. Yeah, and this is where we had the 2017 meeting, and the 2019 meeting is in Pittsburgh. So the world is changing rapidly. When this cover appeared, I think a lot of people who have been digging in their heels and resolving never to think about regenerative medicine realized the jig is up, and they had to really start thinking about this. So this is cover of the best journal in transplantation, American Journal of Transplantation, talking about building new hearts. And very early on, it was possible to build hearts that would beat, which is kind of cool. What you really want is a heart that beats as strong as a real heart, right? You don't want just a namby-pamby weak beat, but an actual heartbeat that can keep an animal alive. But that is also coming. And so we need to start people thinking about the future of medicine being things like this, putting together cells, scaffolds, bioactive factors, and tissue engineering constructs. So some of those constructs can be decellularized organs, right? You have an organ that used to be somebody else's organ, you flush the cells out, put in stem cells from you, and then those cells repopulate the organ. And so that is just one of many ways. You can also have artificial scaffolds. But if you think about however you want to think of it, nature or God or whoever it is that came up with a plan, for instance, for the human kidney, that plan has a lot more nuances in it than we actually know about. I mean, science has really penetrated the whole thing. So when you create an artificial scaffold, it's hard to make it as good as the real thing. So that's one of the reasons why often we start with a decellularized actual organ. And I keep asking this whether I still need this jump starting slide, and I think I still do. You'll meet people still quite resistant to this. And this is not the only area like that. What I'm talking about on Thursday, also there's tremendous feeling in the field of pathology and laboratory medicine against digital pathology. Just like here, there's a tremendous resistance to the idea of regenerative medicine. But eventually that will go away because it's just clear that the world needs this, and it is the future. So the Canadians want this. There is evidence that Canadians do want this. Canadians support radical life extension resulting from advances in regenerative medicine. According to Canada-wide surveys, I've talked before with you about the technological singularity in terms of price performance of computing and just in general. But when we get this to really work, where you take an organ, this pink organ here, red organ, say a heart, flush the cells out, put in your cells, and then grow a heart completely compatible with you. And that really works reliably for all solid organs. That would be enough of a game changer in medicine. It's very much like that moment in time when machines are smarter than the whole human race. Both of those will be like amazing things. We can't really predict what will come after that. But that is coming. It's coming in your lifetime. And also your lifetime is longer than you think, because longevity is going to increase, and you probably don't have a plan. Like if you live to the Hayflick limit, so the Hayflick limit is when your cells can't turn over anymore, it's the age of 140, you likely don't have a plan for like the last 60 years of your life, between 80 and 140. You've never thought of that? You never sat down to sketch out what it should look like? So you may have to do that someday. So the things we've encountered thus far in animal models are that you can get kidney cells into the kidney, stem cells or progenitor cells, but a lot of strange things happen, like podocytes, which ordinarily, this is the filtering unit of the kidney, has specialized epithelial cells that perform part of the kind of barrier function, or keeping some things in the blood and letting other things filter out. Those are called podocytes. But when you try to regenerate the kidney, you get podocytes wandering around outside the glomerulus where you never normally find them. And then you get other areas of the kidney that should have a lot of cells of a certain type, and there aren't any, and so on. So it's clearly very challenging to get all the right cells in the right places. To some extent, and this is a kind of amusing dynamic between physicists and physicians and medical scientists. The cells do know what they want to be and where they're supposed to go and so on. And like physicists, like say making the filter, these magical filters that will sort of simulate the filtration function of the kidney, but to do everything else that the kidney does, you need to have cells doing stuff. So the physicists may be relying on this magic of biological cells knowing where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do. And also the biologists are making similar assumptions about the magic of physics, that physicists can do all these magical things. But as long as these various groups keep talking to each other, eventually we will get it right, and it will be reality-based, and we'll realize to what extent we have to help the cells to know where to go and so on. So there are all sorts of mediators you can give that will cause cells to differentiate in certain ways, or to move towards certain things. And this is the way you can eventually get all the cells in the right places. So I know that you don't feel that you're like, you've been on Earth for a long time, but there are things that you have already learned that you probably discarded because you don't think it's useful. It's like something you learned in some course somewhere, and it's nice that you took that course, but you really don't need the information anymore. One of the things that's interesting about regenerative medicine is these reconstituted organs. Many simple questions that sort of harken back to stuff that you learned in those earlier courses where you don't think you'd ever use that stuff again. Now you need them. And that's true of almost everybody in every audience. So, the other thing that I'm saying is there's a place for you in this. You may think this subject today has nothing to do with you, and it's just kind of wasted because actually you're planning to go into some other area. But the challenges here are very great. The ultimate benefit to mankind of having regenerative medicine that really works and provides organs and tissues for everyone would be fantastic. And whatever your areas of interest are, you have something to contribute. So I wouldn't sort of give up on that idea. And many old-fashioned areas of physiology, of how things work, enter in when you try to figure out how to make stem cell generated organs work. How similar do they need to be to normal organs in order to provide net benefit to the patient? That's a very important question. You don't want to put in an organ that's going to be worse than not having it, right? So that's part of what we're doing in coming up with this classification of tissue engineering pathology. How likely is this reconstituted organ to create, malignant tumors? How likely is it to sort of run amok in some other way? You can imagine putting in a kidney that can't concentrate the urine at all, that it can do everything else, but it can't make a concentrated urine. Some people had thought that that would be lethal or just lead to you pouring out all of your body water in a few hours and you would be dead, but probably there are fairly simple ways to deal with a simple defect like that. So what I'm saying is whatever your own special skills are, that it could be useful in regenerative medicine. And so, to a certain extent, what I've been doing since 2011 is sort of like the Pied Piper or something, leading transplant pathologists toward this tissue engineering pathology, because that is the future, and what we're doing now is not providing benefit to as large a number of people as we would like it to. We're beginning at the very beginning. It's interesting to think about this. One of the smartest people who's ever lived in science is Richard Feynman. You've probably heard that name before. And he said, we're not at the very beginning of time for the human race. We are at the very beginning of time for the human race. It's not unreasonable that we grapple with problems. There are tens of thousands of years in the future. Our responsibility is to do what we can, learn what we can, improve the solutions, and pass them on. And that may seem too simple an idea to sort of really grasp, but I think that's also what this course is about, assuming that mankind has a long run, right? And that will only happen really if we behave in ways where having human beings around actually benefits the overall system, right? So that's a good thing to think about in this course. All right, so it's also interesting to think of old-fashioned beginnings. So there's something called the International Classification of Diseases, and it began in 1851. There's a brand new building in London, you may know it, the Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace burned down a while ago, and I think it's being rebuilt in 2019. Largest, like all glass building in the world at the time it was created. And this international classification of diseases was all oriented around death, ways of death, what it looks like, you know, and time of death, all this sort of thing. Death, 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 death. So I think that what we're looking at with tissue engineering is on sustaining life and figuring out what artificially constructed organs can actually benefit patients. Do you have to have every cell in the right place? Obviously not. But how do you determine what's good enough? And so that I think is worth spending quite a lot of time on. So I realize you don't know what a normal kidney looks like, but like in these regenerative medicine created rat kidneys, you end up with these multiple interconnecting lumens in the center and many very bizarre things. And so people have said, can you call this a kidney? Well, yes, of course you can call it a kidney. It does glomeruli, there's all sorts of things that are specific to a kidney. It's not appropriate to talk about not calling it a kidney. It's appropriate to try to figure out how to make it better so it would actually benefit patients. Yes?
Even what they call those differences, was it still able to process like your blood, your fluid and everything?
Yeah, so at the simplest level, the first question is, okay, so this regenerated organ you have created with stem cells, will blood be able to pass through it without clotting? Because one of the easiest things to do is to strip off the endothelium, the top surface of the blood vessels, and end up with a situation where the major blood vessels just clot like crazy. So that's just one of multiple problems that is solvable. Yeah, so it isn't a simple question. These tissue engineering created organs already produce, like the kidney produces, quote, simple urine. What is simple urine? Exactly. I guess, so it's water with slightly different characteristics from whatever you put in the organ, so the organ has done something to alter it, so it's not the same stuff you're putting in and getting out. And one other thing that has happened here, it's kind of an accident of fate, but it's kind of interesting to think of the influence of young people on things. A certain day, I came into our shared office, you know, I share an office with the young people that I'm training. I said, can any of you draw? And one of the students, Corey Fung, said, I can draw. I said, well, I'm doing this paper. And so finally, there'll be a professional medical artist doing the drawings, but to submit the paper, we have to have a draft of these drawings. And so could you do those draft drawings? So Corey Fung did that. And so these are his pencil sketches and so on. And the reason I'm showing you this is because that's also what's in the final paper. How did that happen? Well, so the editor got the article from me, had a cover letter. I think cover letters are pretty boring, but this one said, you must find a professional artist to redraw the pencil sketches. But I think that was like really boring, and he didn't really notice that, even though it appeared in all the drafts and so on. So we got to the very end, and everybody's very excited about this paper, and there's a particular issue we wanted to go into. There's been no professional artist drawing the art, and so we just went with these pencil sketches as the final art. So that same thing could happen to you. You're working on something, you think, well, you know, nobody's gonna ever see this, and like, this is just I'm just like this person who nobody will ever, I'm working so hard on this and my work will never be recognized, whereas the opposite could actually happen, that something you don't think is the final ends up being the final thing. So, I think that's the end of this lecture for today. It gives you 18 minutes, except for those of you who have to leave early to get to a test somewhere. But anyway, so any questions for me? In our original location for the Banff classification, at the Banff Center for Conferences, we have mule deer poking their heads into the meeting rooms, and obviously we've come a long way from then, considering very high-tech things now. But we're going back there. So now in front of that building, which is called the Trans-Canada Pipeline Pavilion, it's now a new building that can accommodate 470 people, and that's where we're meeting in 2021. And you'll be able to see this original building out the back at the meeting. So anyway, that'll be cool. Do you have any questions? Does this seem connected to your own life? Any of the things that I've said about, humility and leadership, is any of that surprising? Is it what you thought life was like? Did you ever think of somebody, or let me just point out one other thing. So for 27 years, I've been in charge of transplant pathology worldwide, but I haven't held a local leadership role here. For a very long time. I was chair of pathology here from 87 to 92, but I haven't held any major leadership role since 92. And I think a lot of, particularly men, have this feeling that, I'm such an awesome leader that I always have to be the local leader too, and I just never felt that. I thought, that was kind of relaxing. Just sit back and let other people lead things locally and just be a sort of internationally known and, be leading things at a larger scale. And the other thing that I did when I was chair, which may surprise you, so we had a need to create a international disaster relief task force. So when there was an earthquake somewhere with all these crushed people going into kidney failure, that we could bring dialysis, the artificial kidney, to. Now, believe it or not, there wasn't a single clinical kidney physician in the world who thought it would be strategically good for them to be in charge of that. So even though I don't do direct patient care, I ran this thing for years. And when there was an earthquake, I would simply stop everything else that I was doing and focus on the earthquake. And it reached the point, it was really very interesting. So in 1988, I guess I forget the exact year, but anyway, there was a big earthquake in Iran. So I'm at a meeting and I get this phone call. So the Iranian government is offering us a 747 plane to fly supplies from North America to where the earthquake has been. And Iran Air has planes, and they're offering me a plane. Wow, this is a moment. But we didn't have any stuff, right? We didn't have any stuff to put in the plane. So, but later on, we did. But we never actually brought those two things together, and never had some huge plane offered to us. But We actually, in a major earthquake in Turkey, we brought the mortality down from 50%, which is what it used to be, to 15. So we saved substantial numbers of people. Final thing to tell you about that. So there's an article about that in the National Post, and it has a picture of me and my microscope, quake doctor. And when you read that, it's kind of, I think maybe you might get the feeling that the article is too detailed to be real. That you can understand most of it, how they would get those details. But the details about the patients that we saved seem a little bit like, that's amazing that they would have that detail. And it turns out that the journalist who wrote that later got into big trouble with other articles. This one wasn't singled out because he had fabricated patient data. Because it's really hard if you don't speak the language to fly somewhere and meet a lot of affected patients and so on. So it's a great article. Everything it says about me is true. We did help people, but the things about the individual patients, I think, are probably not true, even though this wasn't one of that journalist's articles that he got caught on. But yeah, so he was an award-winning journalist whose career sort of went downhill when people started, well, where's the plane ticket? Right? How did you get there? How did you get this stuff? So anyway, yes.
Are you convinced that regenerative medicine will build upon biologically grown things, or is there a chance that our substitute parts will be purely foreign material?
Well, I think everything is sort of staged. I mean, with time, there's sort of the interim period and the final. So I think that probably with most organs, there will be an interim point where it's mainly biological and made of cells. And then in the long run, yeah, I mean, there'll be synthetic hearts, synthetic kidneys that can do way more than what a normal kidney can do, So you'll be much stronger, able to run faster and stuff with this artificial heart that may not contain any cells at all. It be completely artificial in the long run. And I don't really know how many years that might be, but let's say 150 years from now, I would be certain that that's probably the way it would be.
So if I want to build an artificial heart, I should maybe go into biology, not engineering.
Well, but no, we need both. We need like Shuvo Roy. You'll find I have a video by him. He's like the world's best silicone filter physicist, and his influence in this area has been very important. But the physicians and biologists working with him also have had a very important role. They're one of the largest NIH grants now ever to bring this all together and to start a clinical trial with bioengineered kidneys. So if you leave, you just leave that running, and as long as I don't go very far to one side or the other, it'll be fine. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so other questions? I'm sort of assuming what some of your questions might be. So next time, the digital pathology, I just a little anecdote of this. So I did some of the earliest videos about sort of artificial intelligence, position, and the virtual microscope, virtual slide, and so on. And then we had a faculty meeting in April 2016. So with the idea that we would actually go digital in our own department, we would start presenting our conferences that way, rather than using an actual microscope, that you have this, computerized machine, and that you also can use large touch screens, and with gestures and stuff, you could, manipulate images in very large touch screens, kind of like the war room in a lot of exciting movies where they're putting things over the ships and the troops and stuff. Yeah, so you could sort of practice pathology that way. So I circulated a video of what this would be like and how it would change things and come together. It was a very short discussion. People said, "This would ruin everything. I mean, the whole reason I went into pathology, I love my microscope, I love my slide, I said, okay, we could be the last department to adopt these technologies in Canada. And they said, really? Really? Okay. So now, so you get me doing all this high-tech stuff, and everybody around me is practicing sort of old-fashioned real microscope, real slide, and pathology. But we're moving into a hub lab in 2022, and it will be digital. So what I'm talking about next time, it's not at all a reality of what the practice around me is now, but in 4 years' time, it certainly will be. We'll be keeping only 3 years' worth of slides, and we'll be relying very heavily on the, digital versions of slides, which won't ever fade, and you can't step on them and break them, and all those sorts of things are going to happen with real slides. But anyway, so that's what we're talking about next time. Any questions? Okay, thanks for coming today, and I will now invite the 6 students who have signed up for winter of 2019 to join us for the lecture on next Tuesday the 9th. Okay, thank you very much.
What's the lecture next Tuesday?
So, Rich Sutton.
Oh, yeah.
He's